Hello, my name is Kaylee McGraw-Oldroyd, and I am presenting part 1 of 2 of Reading Dates and Localities for the Latin American Catholic Church Finding Aid Project. If you have any questions, please reach out to me at kayleeoldroyd@familysearch.org. This information has been gathered from the Portuguese genealogical word list on the Family Search Research Wiki in BYU Script Tutorial. Both of these are listed under helpful resources on the instructions page for this project. One thing that is helpful to note is that the standardization of Portuguese did not happen until around the late 1700s, and even then not many places had access to dictionaries, and so some spellings, if you know Portuguese, may seem incorrect, but really they were just spelling it how they would phonetically pronounce it. For instance, in this first line, it says Y became I, Pereia became Pereia. It is phonetically the same, but the Y was then changed to an I. And then there's other instances that are similar to that you just should be aware of. A rule of thumb is we are always going to write what we see, so we're not going to try to guess what the individual was trying to write in modern Portuguese. We're just going to write what they wrote. If the municipality was called Pereia, we would write it exactly how they wrote it, with a Y or an I, however they wrote it. Another thing you should note is that oftentimes in Spanish, Portuguese, and Latin records, they used abbreviations. You can see these in these images. The first one you'll probably see quite often, Nosso Senhor or Nossa Senhora. They usually just did an abbreviation of NS. Another word you'll see abbreviated is freguesia, which means parish, and also paroquia, which you can see on this table on the right. They usually use superscripts for this kind of thing, and you'll just want to be aware. And whenever we write these on the spreadsheet, I'll go over this in more depth on the part 2 instructions, but we'll just write it as we see it. You don't need to have access to creating a superscript or know how to do that. We can just write it. For instance, if it was the paroquia abbreviation, we would just write it P-A-R-O-Q-A, and we'll have a specialist come through and standardize everything before it goes on the wiki. Lastly, that third image on the bottom is a really great example of both use of a more ancient spelling and abbreviation. So they abbreviated the word Nossa Senhora My dos Homens, and my is spelled with kind of a past version of how we would spell my if you know Portuguese, which means mother. So in the modern version we use M-A-E with a diacritic over the A, but in this instance they spelled it M-A-I, which is probably just them phonetically spelling it out. So don't worry about trying to change that into a modern spelling. Just write it as you would see it. So we would write it in this antiquated form on the Google spreadsheet. The next thing you should note is that years were often completely spelled out with words instead of numbers. So for instance, this is written as 1905. We can use this chart, which is also on the genealogical words list page on the Family Search Research Wiki, to kind of translate this. So we can look and see that mil is 1000, 900 is 900, and cinco is 5. So we can translate that into 1905 in English, and you can write that in number form as we will be finding years, which will be explained more in part 2. One other thing you should note is that a lot of Catholic Church records follow a similar format. Older, kind of like pre-1850, would use a format. After that, they often had templates kind of printed out, but they usually keep this same format. That would be starting with the date of the entry in the parish that the event happened in, the municipality the event happened in. And then it goes on to explain the person the event was happening to, their parents, and sometimes their grandparents. We won't be taking down any people's names in this project. We're just taking down the date, the parish, and the municipality. And as you can see on this image on the left-hand side, it says 1884, which is the year. And then it goes on to say Freguesia, and you can see those nice little abbreviations of Nossa Senhora da Conceição de Barra Velha. So in just the first two lines, we already get the year, the parish, and the municipality in one of those entries. So just be aware that that's the usual format for these Catholic Church records. Lastly, we have a helpful resources section under the instructions that you should use. It has a link to the Portuguese genealogical word list on the Research Wiki. It has 2 links to the BYU script tutorial that you can use to compare handwriting. This is especially useful whenever you're trying to read old records in the cursive. You can't quite tell if it's an A or an E or an O. You can compare those to those examples on those pages. The next link is to the Santa Catarina, Brazil genealogy page on the Research Wiki. It has a list of municipalities that you can cross-reference with. These are modern municipality names, so if there's any old or former municipality names mentioned in the records, it might not be so helpful, but a lot of the municipality names stay pretty true to what they are today. The other link is to the All Parishes tab on the Google spreadsheet, which I'll explain and it'll make a lot more sense in part 2, but that also has a list of modern parishes that are existing today that you can kind of compare their names to. And lastly, I linked to Google. I often use this if I need help or don't quite have the spelling of a municipality because the handwriting is strange, and I'll kind of put in my guess of what the spelling is. I'll put Santa Catarina, which is the state that we're researching in right now, and then Brazil. Eventually, we will go on to other states in Brazil and other places in Latin America, hopefully. So, of course, you would change that second part to whatever state or whatever province that it applies to. And that should bring up some results that kind of guide you to the correct spelling of your municipality or parish place. And lastly, please remember to watch part 2 of these instructions so you can get a more detailed information on how to actually fill out the Google Sheet. Thanks so much for volunteering.